it's my pleasure to wish you a good afternoon and welcome to Dataw's 40th anniversary week and today's history presentations. We are in the middle of a 2-week-long celebration that began with the croquet team, complete with period costumes, and concludes this Saturday night with a concert by Bobby Ryder and the Rat Pack Band. In all, over 15 events are being held to commemorate this special occasion in Dataw's evolution as a community and a club. Special thanks to a number of staff and department heads who have put a lot of heart into these events. Thank you. And special thanks to Liz Blair, Barb Fisher, Lenny Faulkner, and over a dozen volunteers who have donated a lot of time and energy over the last year. They did a lot of the planning for this historic occasion. When you see a volunteer, please be sure to show your appreciation. So today's presentation and roundtable discussion will be presented and moderated by Dataw Historic Foundation leadership. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Marilyn Peck, President, to begin today's presentations. Thank you.
I want to welcome everybody to the Dataw Historic Foundation Afternoon of History, Ties of Times, Navigating 40 Years on Dataw Island. Before we begin, I'd like those who have received an originals pin to stand up and be recognized. These people brought property on Dataw Island before December 31st, 1994. Okay, so everybody. This afternoon, we will present 3 different panel discussions. The first will be Charting the Course, a prelude to 40 years on Dataw Island with Dr. Larry Rowland and Evie Rogers. Larry is a noted historian, author, former owner of Dataw Island, and resident of Dataw. Evie Rogers is a native of South Carolina. In Dataw's early years, she was on the board of directors of the Historic Foundation. She is also a former member of the Boston City Council and the South Carolina House of Representatives. Larry will tell us about Dataw from the inside, describing his family's journey from inheriting Dataw Island to selling it to Alcoa. Evie will give us her outside perspective on Dataw. For instance, she won a lottery ticket to purchase one of the first homes built on Dataw. And she was the only course designer through her ticket. These anecdotes offer a unique perspective on the island's development and its connection to the individuals involved. I will moderate this panel, Bill Sky will moderate the second panel covering the 1980s and 1990s, and Diane Roney will moderate the third panel covering the 2000s and 2010s. We will take questions along the way. However, due to time constraints in this large audience, we ask that you write down your questions on the little pieces of paper we have at the front door, hand them and pass them out to the end of your line. The moderator will read them at an appropriate time. The first panel goes to 12:30, and we'll have a 30-minute break before continuing at 3. I would also like to thank Bill and Diane for all the hard work that they have done, hard work, putting this together. Like to thank members who help support the Historic Foundation. Events like this are put on through member money that we raise through memberships only. So it's very important to us to have as many members of Dataw as possible, so we can continue to put on functions that all of you would like to enjoy. And here is Edie and Larry.
This work?
Yeah. Well, we can.
Funny, I can't hear. That's what. That's what. We'll see how it works. I find if I hold it, then I swing it around, and then somebody in the front row will catch it. So my part of the story starts in 1924 at Smith College, Massachusetts. My mother was raised in Montclair, born in New York City, raised in Montclair, New Jersey, and went to Smith College, graduated in 1924. But her whole family was from Beaufort. Her father was Morris Sanders, who I'm named after, was a Beaufortonian. Actually, he was born in Farmville, South Carolina, a place of some fame and note nationally these days. And so this was a burial in South Carolina family, the Sanders family. And my mother's just happened to be raised in Montclair because of the accident of history and opportunity. Her father did very well in New York City in the early 20th century. And when she graduated from Smith College, she didn't have a particular goal in mind, but she had an opportunity. One of her family friends was Lillian Gilbert. Now, some of you may remember that name. Lillian Gilbert was the mother of the Cheaper by the Dozen. And the Cheaper by the Dozen, that family lived across the street from my mother in Montclair, New Jersey, in the early 20th century. And all those kids that were growing up, my mother was their babysitter. That's the job. And the oldest daughter of that family, Ann Gilbert, and my mother were about the same age and were friends and neighbors. So when my mother graduated from Smith College, Lillian Gilbert, the mother of the family, was headed to Europe to give a series of lectures on time motion studies. This is the engineering of the 1920s. And her husband, Frank Gilbert, was the great national guru of time motion efficiency studies, you would call it, time motion or industrial production. And after World War I, it was very much desired in Europe. So he had a whole series of lectures that he was going to give around Europe, starting in Great Britain. And he died, as the story, if you've read Cheaper by the Dozen, suddenly. And Lillian Gilbert picked up the mantle and was headed to Europe to give those lectures. But she needed an assistant. And my mother just graduated from Smith College, and they were old friends. And my mother was kind of was a high-tech girl in the early 1920s. She could type 100 words a minute without a mistake. I watched her do this job. She had a Royal typewriter, and it sounded like a machine gun. She was, very large correspondence, and just loved it. She was that kind of person. So she went to Europe with Lillian Gilbert as her administrative assistant. And on the ship, on the way over, now let me back up a little bit, because this is kind of interesting in America. Lillian Gilbert was an engineer like her husband, Frank, but she couldn't get an engineering degree anyway because she was a woman. So she ended up getting a PhD in psychology from Brown University. That was the degree, but she kept doing what she was doing. There's so many asides to this, and I'm going to get lost eventually. Just this is an aside of note. She began to concentrate on time motion studies for women. That meant the kitchen, and she's noted as designing the modern kitchen. And you think of the kitchen that you have in the houses on Dataw Island, and the old country kitchen that preceded the 19th century, and consider the efficiency of those two functions. Well, Lillian Gilbert was one of the people who designed the modern kitchen. And most specifically, she designed the foot pedal trash can. You know, all the great inventions of the 20th century you do not use. There's one you do. At any rate, Lily was in her own right a remarkable person. Run my mother, so my mother lived in Europe. And on that trip was the first woman engineer in the United States, a policeman, Rochester, New York, someone. They were roughly contemporaries. And they knew each other. I mean, they knew of each other. So they met. My mother met Kate Gleason. And that is the beginning of the story of Dataw Island in our family. Kate Gleason saw my mother type hunters and said, come work for me. So she did. She was Kate Gleason's secretary and traveling companion for several years in the mid-1920s. And Kate Gleason traveled around Europe with my mother, was to war-torn post-World War I Europe, Czechoslovakia. Kate Gleason rebuilt the town of Septemont, France, who had been bombed out. She used her own. Kate Gleason was quite well and brilliant. She was the heir, one of the heirs to the Gleason Gear Works, Rochester, New York, which is to this day one of the largest machine tool companies in the world. They became famous because Kate Gleason's father designed the bevel gear. He got a patent on the bevel gear. And you think of high-speed machinery and how high-speed machinery would run with cog gears and how it can run with bevel gears. So he was the father of a great deal of high-speed industrial machinery in the 20th century, and Gleason Gear Works profited from that. And so Kate Gleason was the first woman engineer graduated by Cornell University. The company is huge in Rochester, New York. She was many of the structures at the University of Rochester are named for Kate Gleason, the Gleason family. And my mother and Kate Gleason traveled around Europe. And everywhere they went, Kate Gleason would say, oh, isn't this just lovely? It's a beautiful place. And my mother would say, this is the story in town. My mother's refrain was constant. She said, yes, it's very nice, but you haven't been to Beaufort, South Carolina. So on and on and on. And in 1926, my mother brought Kate Gleason to Beaufort. And she bought up everything she could get her hands on. In the 1920s, Beaufort was very expensive. The recession, the Great Depression started here almost 10 years before it started in the rest of the country. And Kate Gleason found lots of opportunities. She bought the old Verdier Dataw property at the east end of Bay Street. And she built the Gold Eagle Hotels on that property, which had a huge impact on 20th century Beaufort. She bought Verdier Bluff on the west side of the Bay of Beaufort. And that's where Beaufort Memorial Hospital is. And if you go to Beaufort Memorial Hospital and you go into the lobby, the way I can break it you will see that Kate Gleason is memorialized throughout there because she gave that property for that purpose to the trustee of the hospital in her will in 1932. She bought most of northern Ladies Island. And this is where Royal Pines is today. And much of the property north to the Coosaw River, she owned, and she built a golf course. It was not the first golf course in Beaufort County. It was built behind the National Cemetery in the 1890s. But it was the first commercial golf. In Beaufort County, it was the first. I mean, you know, what a visionary living. She built the Colony Gardens Resort for many of us with a swimming pool. The only other swimming pool was out of Paris Island built by the government. And so Kate Gleason had enormous impact on Beaufort in years when Beaufort was really in the dumps. I mean, people couldn't afford to paint their houses, and it was dirt poor. The bank went broke in 1926. The last bank, the Beaufort Bank, went broke in 1926. Incidentally, that's the building where Panini sits. So you go into Panini's, you see carved in a stone up there. Beaufort Bank started in 1910, went broke in 1926. That's how long it lasted. And but the bank, when the bank went broke and they reorganized, the depositors in the bank got 9 cents on the dollar. So Beaufort was floating. This is where everybody met. And your deposits, you got 9 cents back. So it was pretty bad. And Kate Gleason came to this town because my mother made her. And that ability. And had a huge impact. And among the things that she bought and intended to develop, and then Kate Gleason became, she was the first woman inducted into the American Society of Concrete Engineers. She loved concrete. If you're from, I just talked to Bill from Rochester. East Rochester has some buildings that she built there that are still there. They will never come down. They will be artifacts for archaeologists 10,000 years from now. Just 10. So she really believes in concrete construction and became a member of the National Society. And among the other things she did in those days is she bought property on the north side of San Francisco Bay. What's that town called? Sausalito. Thank you very much. I love it when you get information. Sausalito. So she bought property and built houses in Sausalito before there was a bridge. Talk about a visionary. And they were all concrete houses. She built everything out of concrete. So she would have built everything out of concrete on Dataw if she'd been alive. And she did build some things. Because over on PD Point and over on Maple Point, which is now Gleason's Landing, there are remnants of the concrete seawalls that Kate Gleason built in the 1940s, preceding a potential development of Dataw. Well, Kate Gleason did not live long enough to see the fruition of her plans for Beaufort, but she died in 1932, and in her will in 1933, she left her dear beloved to the hospital trustees. Her family kept the Gold Eagle Hotel as an operating enterprise. Her family kept the Colony Gardens as a family enterprise. It was kind of progressive at that time.
We bought it one time later.
Yes.
Yeah. In the 70s.
We had to control our medical device. So Kate Gleason just had enormous impact. And one of the proudest things in my memory is that my mother brought her, And when she died in 1932, in her will of 1933, she left Dataw Island to my mother. Now they're close. I have analyzed, I haven't psychoanalyzed, which I unfollowed. But Kate Gleason never had any children. And my mother lost her mother in 1910. And so I think those two ladies were very close in that regard. I think Kate Gleason for a time considered my mother her child in a way. In any case, they were definitely close. And Kate Gleason's expression of that was to leave this product to my mother. It's great in asset as this has been for our family. In 1933, when the will was settled, it was worth $15,000. Well, let me put that in perspective for you because we have the treasurer's report for Rivers Farm. These are people that Edie and I personally knew. Another artifacts of history. Sorry. But, Rivers Farm wrote a report, which I found as a historian, on the total value of all the taxable assets in Beaufort County. In 1935, all of Beaufort County, including Hilton Head Island, was worth $3.75 million. And if you wonder what happened, I mean, just I know a lot of you guys, a lot of you ladies in our accountants. You can do the internal rate of return on that in your head. It's like a tornado. That's what's become of Beaufort County since Jenkins' will. And that's what's become of Dataw Island, because it's a microcosm of that history. So Dataw, my mother had Dataw, she had no idea what to do with it. And in 1936, she married an engineer, my father. Born in Oregon, raised in Buffalo, with the University of Michigan, played football. University of Michigan, current national champion. Thank you very much. And he was a tackle for Michigan football. At any rate, they came to, when they got married in 1936, they came down with the idea of doing something with Dataw. Now, my mother wasn't going to live out here. You know, it was a wilderness. Kingsley incidentally built for wooden bridges. A lot of discussion among our group about bridges. And I might point out that for more than 50 years, we had a wooden bridge built on palmetto pipes. And it held trucks that carried tons of tomatoes and many head of cattle and lumber carts and trucks. I mean, it carried all sorts of things. So I don't know why we can't build a it's something that our community will be discussing for a while. Sure. But so there was a bridge over here, and my mother lived in town. She lived with her grandmother who died in 1932, and then her great aunt Mimi, who I knew. Great aunt Mimi was born in 1869. So, and great aunt Mimi lived until 1950. So, and they lived in the house on the east end of Bay Street, right across from the old Eagle Hotel. And so, whenever my mother grew up in there with her grandmother and her great aunt, and so they lived in that house in the 1930s. Well, my father built a little cottage on Jenkins Creek out of concrete, of course. It wasn't very well built, except for the cypress planks on the roof. But he tried to raise hogs up here. He thought he was going to get rich raising hogs. There was a great deal of government effort in raising food in the 1930s. So you get a lot of subsidy, you get a lot of help. And he didn't work very well. He raised a lot of hogs, and he went to the state fair in Orangeburg, and he won a blue ribbon for best hogs in the field. He was a maritime engineer, and he had been in the merchant marine in the 1920s. But what does he do about hogs? But he did it well. But it wasn't paying him. And he just said, I can get a job. So in 1939, they moved to Detroit and started working in Detroit. And we were gone. And we kept hearing about this place in South Carolina, this children. And we came to visit from time to time. And the little concrete house my father built was out there. But he had to figure out some way to make it pay for itself, or at least support itself. So, and during World War II, everybody wanted food, and John Martin farmed Dataw Island. They had a house out, grew a lot of food, and Bill Campbell helped him. And while I was plowing the fields as a kid, I found a metal license plate in South Carolina that offered metal driver's licenses. And I looked at Bill Campbell, I know Bill. 1943. But, so, and then after the war, there was a huge demand for lumber. So my dad made a deal with Harry Ham, one of the biggest lumbermen in the Southeast and from Hampton, South Carolina. And he had a lumber operation out here in 1948, 49, 50, or 51, in which he had sawmills around the island and took most of an awful lot of the pine timber off the island. So that when Alcoa got it, it was all oak trees. Pine were gone. But there were sawmills and sawdust piles that we played in as children. Leftovers from Harry Ham. And my father and Harry Ham remained friends their whole lives. He very much admired Harry Ham. He died a few years ago. They're all, it's buried in Hampton County. But his son lives right over there where I'm living. And then in the 50s, we leased the property to the Bishop. And Sonny Bishop has written a book about that, which I can recommend. Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
That was about that era. This is in the 50s, and they grew tomatoes and they prospered with the tomato. And we were trying to share the island. And then when that lease ended, my dad did not renew it. Then he went into business in the cattle business on Dataw with Milton Parker. But if they're, I know they're old Utonians here, but Milton Parker, my dad was great friends. Milton Parker had a feedlot, which is now occupied by a big motel over the feedlot is over on the back of Pigeon Point. But they grew the cattle here, they took them there, they fed them out, sold them out, made enough money to pay the taxes and have a good time. And so as I was growing up, I was in the cattle business. That's one of the things I did. I had to clear the fields, plant some grass every now and then, and with tractors, and help round up the cattle. And my mother died in 1965. My father packed up, one of the last things he said about his hip, Buford, that's your mother's town. He lived in Greece. He lived in Greece the last 20 years. And he turned over the operation and the herd of cattle to me. So I became dead. No, I had a very good friend who was in the business better than I did, Jerry Gallup. And Jerry and I ran the cattle business for a number of years and had a lot of fun. And sold just enough cows to pay the tax. And then you can't grow enough cattle to support a piece of property. Get out there. So I leased it to Marvin Ballard, who was a big tomato farmer out here and a very good man. Unfortunately, those were the years that everybody got, a lot of people out here got caught up in the smuggling business. With some of that activity cross country. I had nothing to do with that. But it was an interesting kind of a while. And then in 1980, my brother and I, if you look at that picture over there on the wall, that was my brother and his family, Margo and me and our family, having a Thanksgiving dinner at the old cottage on Jenkins Creek, that's Petey Point, at Thanksgiving 1980. The reason we were all there was to decide what we were going to do with Dataw. You look at the number of children in that picture, and figure out what we did. But so we made the decision at that time to sell the property. And we were looking for a developer. We were not looking for somebody who was going to buy it and turn it into a hunting ground or a private estate, because that wasn't going to do anything for the community. We had lots of, and interestingly enough, my brother had an advertising company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Buckheim and Wool was called. He figured that he could do the advertising and I could show the property. And we wouldn't have to have an agent. So we did that, and he was right, it worked. I mean, he had ads in The Economist, he had ads in the Wall Street Journal, he knew how to do all that stuff. And we had a lot of interest in this property in the early 1980s, 1980, 81. I don't know if any of you remember at that time, but the French government flipped to a socialist government in the early 1980s. And billions of French francs moved into Swiss banks, into Spanish, and they went any place they could be to get out of France. This is very ancient history. This is what always happens in France. France is a very rich place, and whenever the politics are not right, the money goes overseas. So a lot of their money was coming overseas. The best arm we had was French money represented by Dallas agents. And then we had a call from Alco. And I went down and met Bill Cochran and Dick Plowman at airport all through here. And now there are lots of stories. I was told I was not supposed to tell one of them, but I'm going to do that anyway. We had, because we're sitting here, right over there, over the bank, there's a big oak tree leaning over the bank. And all of my childhood, there was a nest, an eyrie of golden eagles in that nest. And you would see the golden eagles. They weren't as, I guess they would hunt for fish, but you'd see them catching little animals on the ground. Golden eagles, apparently, you see a lot of times on it. Well, we would very often run it. We had a 2-lane dirt road coming from the wooden bridge on Palmetto Pike and going all the way up to the end of the island. And we would see a golden eagle in the road. And the golden eagle is a very big bird. And the wingspan of the golden eagle is wider than the pickup truck. It's 6.5 feet wide. It's really big, heavy bird. And so I drove around with Dick Plowman and Bill Cochran in the front seat of my Chevrolet pickup truck. And I came around the corner and I just described the golden eagles stood up. And there was a golden eagle sitting in the, and they fly in front of the truck because they can't get through the canopy of oak tree. So they just lead you down the road. But it couldn't have been better. So the eagle, he finally found an opening in the trees and he took off. And these two guys were flying for quite a while. And Dick Plowman leaned over and he said, in Florida, we have to give up 200 acres for every eagle that's on that property. And I said, you'll never see that eagle again. And Dick and Bill Cochran told that story on the Rotary Club without the editing. At any rate, we had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, they were great guys, and we made it. They bought an option in 1982, and we closed in January 1983 on that property. They closed on that property. They didn't argue much about the price. They did argue about the acre. I've been paying tax on 1,100 acres of property. And they said, oh, there's only 950 acres. I said, wait. Well, now we know it's sea level rise, or you can do it. Engineers. But we closed the property. It was very happy. But one of the reasons it was acceptable is because I knew that these guys and that company was going to do the right thing with this property and with its communities. I'm having trouble managing our medical needs. That they were going to do the right thing with the community. That the economic impact of this development was going to have an immense impact on Beaufort County. And it certainly did that. And I think that's when our story ends. And the story of the community begins. So I'm going to turn it over to Edie, who was right smack in the middle of all the community activity surrounding the development of Dataw. I'll say one thing. They borrowed somewhat just slightly over $20 million to start the development of this project. It was the largest loan ever issued in this part of the state. So that was when the economic impact began, and that's what I had always hoped it would be. At any rate, the community impact was quite large, and I will turn it over to the person who was the head of the community at that time.
I don't ever want to disagree with my friend Larry, and I could listen to
All day long. He has so many great stories he could tell. But trust me, we had bought the Secession House in 1981. I was busy restoring and adding on to the little kitchen house, and 3 children in college. And he wasn't paying attention to what was going on. But I can tell you, and this has nothing to do with daughter, which you probably need to understand why I started paying attention to my surroundings. I would take my cup of coffee and the newspaper, the Beaufort Gazette, to the porch and sit and enjoy the water view and the quiet in the morning and read the paper. One morning, I read the paper, said the city council meeting the night before had discussed the possibility of filling in the marsh between the river and all along Bay Street there to provide additional parking. And that's how it happens. People like me are sitting around drinking their coffee instead of paying attention to what the government is doing. So I started going to city council meetings, never with any intention of running for an office or serving there, but I was sort of a community activist when the time permits. I mean, you got to stay involved sometimes. But at any rate, I started going to those meetings twice a month. And then I reached the point where I was 5 or 6 blocks away from City Hall. I'd walk down and get the agenda package on Friday for the meetings so that I could read the background of the things that we might be discussing. At some point, I realized from reading those agenda packages that some of our elected folks on council didn't have time to do the job because they were asking questions that had been answered in the agenda package. So I decided to do this better than they do. So I did run and was elected and served on it 1 term, and then ended up selling Secession Ladies Island. So that's why I didn't do that. But at any rate, the community was delighted, if you want to know the community impact. Now, I'm not speaking for everybody. There are always naysayers. We all know that. But the economic impact that you mentioned, the jobs provided here is just amazing. But I remember as a member of city, see, all this happened before. I went on city council in '89. This one started in '83. But as a member of the council, I kept remembering when all of this was being discussed, how many times then Mayor Henry Chambers would say in a discussion when we were trying to find monies to do some project, something that the city needed. And he would say, well, that's a perfect use of the funds from the UDAG grant that Dataw's paying back. Well, I thought, why wasn't the county doing the UDAG grant? This was certainly not in the city limits, so why was the city doing it? The city had their own water system, and in the early 80s, I believe, don't hold me to this date, but they opened the first phase of the sewage treatment plant. So the city was far ahead, actually, and thanks to Henry Chambers' leadership in all that. But Henry and Bill Cochran had formed a wonderful relationship. Bill Cochran was an outgoing, capable, really, my personal feeling was a man of integrity and got involved in the entire community in a big way. He was there to help with all sorts of things. Now, I'm sure that Bill and Henry got their heads together because Dataw needed a water source. And I am sure, this is in my own mind, I have nothing to prove this, they decided, Henry, having been on the receiving end of federal money to do the park, which had opened in 1779, knew how to get money out of Washington. And so, and this UDAC, which is an urban development grant, was then available. So I'm sure that they had a long-term discussion about this. And Henry was, if there's ever such thing as a true independent, he maintained a wonderful relationship with both Republican Senator Strom Thurmond and Democrat Senator Fritz Hollings. So when he called, he could get in. And so he made those calls. And because of that relationship, he was able to get, I cannot think of the amount of money. By today's standards, it wasn't very much, but it was a large UDAC grant that would send water, Beaufort City water, out to Dataw. And then through the years, as I know nothing about the financial arrangement, paid it back, but it was paid back regularly. My fellow council person at that time, Fred Washington, tells me, because I had to think, now who was there when this was actually done? You know, I wanted to know more about that grant. Fred says, oh yeah, he was opposed to it. He did not think that the city should be getting this enormous loan and doing this and lending it into development out here. But anyway, he saw he was going to lose that battle. The council was going to vote to do it. And so he decided to get himself a plum if he could. That, and he freely told me this, and he never said, don't tell anybody. But he said he asked that the funds be put into what we would call today a designated fund, and it was named the revolving loan fund, with the full intention of primarily the people who lived in the northwest quadrant in the city of Beaufort being able to get loans to upgrade their homes, redo. I don't know, maybe they could be build an entire house. I don't know. And my question to him then was, well, did it work? And he said, no, they rarely anybody ever borrowed any of that money. So the money was accumulating. And that's why Henry would say, wait a minute, that's a legitimate use of the UDAC funds through the years that I do. I want to drop back for a minute. I never fail to learn something when I listen to Larry. Today I learned that what the name that we pronounce in the South, Gilbreth, he said almost sounded like Gilbert to my old ears. But at any rate, I read the book Cheaper by the Dozen probably 50 years ago, a long time ago, and I was fascinated by it because Frank Gilbreth Jr., I'm sure, was a journalist in Charleston, the Post and Courier, or whatever the paper was named at that time. News and Courier. Yeah.
Possession.
Angela Cooper was his pen name, yes. And he wrote wonderful. He was our version of David Lauderdale, if you read that. You've read this after the years. But it was fascinating, the whole concept of the timing of doing things. So if you get an opportunity to pick up that book, Cheaper by the Dozen is a great little easy read book. Now, where do I go from here? I don't think, I'm sure there was probably some opposition in the community about the development, but you didn't hear it. We did. The biggest protest we ever had in Beaufort many years ago was when the tree huggers joined hands and held the trees where Publix was built. It was just like yes, taking down trees, which is why your parking is always a little difficult, and that's not parking area over there. And we won't mention what it looks like right now. At any rate, these organizations that now do raise objections to some of the development, like Pine immediately comes to mind. They weren't formed then. I'm speaking of the Gullah Geechee and the Sea Coalition and things that weren't formed. And every time I've heard opposition to these things, I have to say, think what our community would be like if we didn't have Dataw Island out there. Because the residents of Dataw Island just became an integral part of this community, volunteering for all sorts of organizations. And I'm talking about from St. Helena Elementary School to the Green Children to picking up trash on the roads to every organization in Beaufort, from the dozens up the Deer House to they're there, they are involved. And I personally appreciate that. And I'm not even mentioning how much money you put in the treasury every year with your taxes. But I would think, and see, I really was not paying that close of attention when this was done. And I don't remember how the county officials reacted, but I would certainly think they would have been delighted that you were going to do this and help the community grow and fund it. Trust me, by that time, you were already hearing it said that Hilton Head Island funded the treasury for Beaufort County, both of the roads, still so poor. Well, thank you. You helped to fund it and bring north of the Broad out of the shadows. It's taking care of the community. But I loved reading this book. I loved the description of when the bishops rented, leased through the Rowland family this property. They grew cattle, they raised cattle, and hogs, and farming vegetables and things also on this land. And they have beautiful descriptions. And by the way, Sonny Bishop taught my children, as did Margot Rowland at the Beaufort Academy. Never use the word Dataw. There's a whole chapter about Dataw, D-A-T-H-A, which may have been pronounced Dataw. I don't really know, but he never once spells D-A-T-A-W, which I found interesting. That he must not have accepted that renaming of the area. But at any rate, they made great use of it. But I believe he says that they stopped leasing about 1960. And so Jen is probably when you took over doing your things out here. And I
Go ahead.
think we'll leave it there and see what questions.
Well, the name, I'm glad you brought it up.
Yes.
It's very important to understand it because it goes way back before our time. The name Dataw first appears, and we don't know the pronunciation. It's a phonetic spelling of a Native American word. We don't know what the word was. I think something beautiful substance. I mean, but it appears in the Spanish records in 1526. It's spelled in those records D-A-T-A, Dataw, or Dataw, however you want it. And it was referred to a giant Indian king who lived somewhere on the sea islands and grew greatly by eating special herbs that grew on these islands. And this is the kind of story that Spanish explorers would bring back. But it doesn't, the name appears in some of the earliest records of discovery of America. And we don't know what it applied to, and we don't know who it described. But over the years, it had at least 11 different official spellings. And one of the things that Bill Cochran did is he asked me to help him with the history. And so he said, give me a list of the spellings of this phonetic word, Native American word. And that was the oldest. And D-A-T-H-A, Dataw was the first word used, the first spelling used in the English records for the land grants of this property. And that spelling goes back to 1697. Then over the years, it was spelled Daothoa, D-A-O-T-H-O-A. Your pronunciation is as good as anybody's. It was spelled D-A-W-T-H-A-W, Dataw. And, half a dozen more that I can't utter. But the one that Bill Cochran chose was the one that was adopted by the federal government during the Union occupation and the Civil War and used for about 80 years afterwards in official U.S. government documents. And that is D-A-T-A-W, the spelling that we have now. Now, I do hear folks who come from other parts of the United States who pronounce it Dataw. That violates the original history. It's whatever it is, whatever spelling you choose, it's Dataw. And so Bill had that. He adopted this spelling because he thought it was the more both pronounceable and more officially accepted. And he's probably right about that. The documents before that time were D-A-T-H-A because Kate Gleason had her lawyers go back into the original land grants in South Carolina and find the original spelling and get all the official spellings. D-A-T-H-A, which is what we. But I don't know how to pronounce D-A-T-H-A, and neither did Bill Cochran. And therefore, he found a spelling that is more applicable here. But it's an interesting piece of history. And there are other spellings. If you don't like this one, we'll vote it out. It doesn't.
I read the whole outline for today, and there are going to be pictures shown while we're having a break. And if you have not seen the pictures of both the bridge and the causeway before Dataw, please look at it, and then you'll say a special prayer for next tonight that is here to get you over. It's downright scary. I would have to get back and forth from the main room, say on the island. But be sure to take a peek at those.
It looks scary, but we used to travel at about 40 miles an hour. It's literally comes off that bridge, but not really what we have, but with that, we were kids. We was childhood, and we had a lot of. What are we going to do? Spot questions, Bill and. That's all.
So if anybody has questions, if you have pieces of paper, you can send them down the aisle. So we can write, if you wrote them down, Diane and Lou will collect them. Anybody? So somebody asked, where did the John smugglers drop off their package of wrestling? Please stop. I really probably required improvements to be made in town. They were built. They were built here. Is that true? 2 questions.
Which we're having trouble with technology. It's supposed that work.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What was the question again?
Where did the gentlemen smugglers drop off their packages on that?
Oh, that's interesting. It's something. But we had a dock down at Meeting Point, and the dock is still there. It's been blown away a couple times and replaced. My father built a dock there in the early 60s, probably 1960, in front of the concrete cottage that he had built in 1936 when he was there. So he had a dock in the cottage, fish camp as they call them today. And that dock was very handy for moving bales of marijuana. And I hate to speak out of school, but Farmer Galley was a great guy, a good friend, and a good, an honest businessman. But his boys, who were little governor, saw the opportunities and apparently, seized them. So there was a fair amount of Mary Jane that was moved across the dock and along these roads. And here's the story I'll tell. One of those gentlemen was a friend of mine, came to me and offered me $25,000 in cash to leave the gate, just to leave the gate open. And at the time, you see all the little kids, they were really hungry. And they were very tempted, but I knew not to touch it. Because I knew people in the business, and, we had heard about it. It was just, it was bad. It was going to be bad business. Seemed like fun at the time. It was going to be. Well, within the week following that, Butch Polk was in. Many people don't know who Butch Polk is, but he was the chief sled agent in this region. And I had gone to high school and played football with Butch Polk. I couldn't play football. So he was an all-state fullback. And he was a great guy. He is a great guy. And he had been from the sheriff department to the highway department to the sleds, and he was the chief agent. And he came to sit down with me. He said, "Would you mind if I go out to Dataw and look around every now and then?" I said, "Butch, I'm going to give you your own key." So if you can go out there and look and take anybody you want to go. And that kept me from getting tangled in that business. And but that business, Dataw was involved in that business during the early 1970s. And I was not. I swear.
Prove that he's innocent, I guess. I can read someplace, I think, that airplanes were set up to photograph all of these isolated islands and find out where there were locations such as a dock where they could do their unloading, and that it literally was going on all over the county where there was an isolated area that they could get away from.
Next question. What was the history of voodoo here? Chains on the fences.
Well, I guess I'm not the right person to ask. There was a lot of talk. The African American population of Dataw Island had gone by the 1930s. More than half of the African American population in Beaufort County had left Beaufort County in the 1930s. So those folks who had been sharecroppers on Dataw in the early 20th century were all gone. It was an empty place. And there's left graveyards. There are graveyards that your community maintains and is the host. We are the host for. And we did that when we owned the property. We never prevented anybody from being buried in one of their family places. I remember there was one very large funeral here in the 50s, and they came down from Harlem In other words, these were folks that had money and big cars and all sorts of stuff. And we opened the gate for them, bought it, welcomed them all in, and they went to the graveyard over on Cotton Deck and had a pretty nice funeral over there. And there used to be little items of voodoo nature, I would say, on those graves, in those graveyards, kids. I don't know enough about them. Well, I do know a little bit about Dr. Buzzard. You ever heard of Dr. Buzzard? Oh, Dr. Well, his name was Stanley Robinson, and his grandfather was a state representative. So he was not an insubstantial person, and he was not crazy. He just had, Sea Island religious beliefs. He was a practitioner. And there were a lot of people who believed that. And it is a tradition that comes over. It's clearly African. As a scholar, I've worked on trying to find the origin of the term God. And I think I found it. Other scholars will argue with me, but they're wrong. Well, it comes from Angola. It's the native term for the region of Angola.
Continue.
Yeah. In the customs records of the 1790s and early 19th century, there are ships landing in Charleston that came from Congo and Angola. N''Gullh. That's as clear to me as anything. And it's the African name for what the Latinizer Portuguese term Angola is. Angola and Angola. And so that is where a lot of these folks came from. That is where we should look for cultural and religious origins. Our form. There are lots of different forms of African spiritualism. Asian, West African, but ours is from Congo and Angola. And it has some unique characteristics. It has some characteristics that are still here, like King Blue. You've heard of King Blue. And since a kid, that was very common, that the little cottages and the small houses of the freedmen here painted the doors and sashes blue because they thought it kept the heat away. Well, that's an Angolan Gullah tradition. And they also swept the front yard. They would rake the front yards. They would not grow grass, but they would rake the front yard every day to eat. Because as long as it was real smooth and raked, they could see the footprints in the hay in the morning. See that? I never, I never heard of any of that on Dr. but it was not uncommon to say that. And the great practitioner was Stanley Robinson, the famous Dr. That's it.
And then it became Sheriff McTeer. Sheriff McTeer, who was our sheriff, studied the voodooism and learned enough about it. And again, the books I've read so long ago, I don't think everyone knows. But he learned enough about it that he convinced this community that he had some of those powers. And he got so darn good. I'm told that he could spin the words to the community. Well, John Doe, whatever. I know he did so and so, and you better get in here. Was the man coming to himself? That's great. The only thing I remember hearing that actually happened when someone was upset about something, throwing a dead chicken in the yard, Charles, throwing a chicken with his that had been brought in your driveway, your yard, was some kind of a warning. Does anybody know what that's all about? But it was part of the voodoo culture. And if you haven't read those Sheriff Ideas books, there's books to look for. They're very entertaining, and they do show you a different culture to a large degree. Because you came from everywhere and you just play with redneck southerners.
I would tell you a story. This brings us back to Dataw. Bill Cotton was very sensitive to getting along with the African American community on St. Helena Island. And he asked me for some help in that regard. Well, at the time, I was doing a lot of work with Emory. Thank you very much. You know, Emory Camp. And Emory Camp was the head of Penn Center at the time. And my parents, going way back, were close to Penn Center because they knew the size laws that ran. And so I asked Emory Campbell if he would go to dinner with Bill Cochran. Bill Cochran paid for a very fine dinner, very fine restaurant. And Emory Campbell, I had been to events in Columbia together, worked with the car together, good friends, very good friends. Now very old friends. And so I set that up. And Bill Cochran, I mean, they hit it off like, you know, it was hand and glove. And Bill Cochran just overcame whatever resistance there was in the African American community to this development of this idea. I'm sure there was some opposition. I'm sure there was some, but the establishment was much for it was for this because Bill Cochran knew how to do that. He was a man of the people, and he wanted to get to know the black people as well. And he did. He did. And this place has been a big movement in the community for the last 40 years.
Larry, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that Bill Cochran had built in the county to make it easier for Dataw, such as the fire station, how that all happened?
As if I knew, all I can remember is when we had built a home on Sunset Bluff before we retired in 1968. How's that for another? And I remember going door to door in the community trying to collect funds for the volunteer fire department there. We had volunteer fire departments, and I don't even know at what date they became funded by the county or the city, wherever they were, as opposed to being volunteer fire departments. But I did go door to door and collect funds to try to help keep it alive.
And, you know, right outside the gate is the fire department, which is big boom to your insurance funds and our community. And there's also a sewage treatment plant right behind the fire. Now, I don't know to what degree that sewage treatment plant, it's all Beaufort Chapel Water and Sewer Authority now, impacts the larger Frogmore community, but I would hope that it does. And, you know, everybody lived on well water and septic tanks and before Dataw was here. And I think, you know, environmentally and health-wise, that's been a great boon to the local community. But I don't know enough about it to tell you the truth, to be precise. Anyway.
And this is not Dataw necessarily, but you have to impact it there.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Everybody hear that? Good. Can you repeat that?
I'm not sure that I can repeat it. Correct me if I'm wrong. That do you remember any of the dates of that? That Bill Cochran bought the land to put the firehouse down. 85 or so.
To keep our fire insurance rates down. Otherwise, the rates were prohibitive to purchasers.
And it kept the fire insurance rates down for everybody else in the area too. Yeah, thank you very much.
Now,
Which could just tell you about the Beaufort Jackson Water School Authority. That was established, what, in the early 80s or in mid-80s at the latest, I think. And Henry James and the city of Beaufort were opposed to that. Henry's reasoning for that was, well, of course, the city had their own water and sewer facility, or getting into the sewer business. Prior to that, folks, sewer and from septic tanks or whatever was dumped into the river in right near the city, in the city of Beaufort. But at any rate, his feeling, his reasoning at the time for objecting to this authority being established that would handle countywide, except there are exceptions. Rhode Island has their own public service area, and I'm not sure what all goes on down there. But the reason being that would be an appointed board, an appointed group, as opposed to elected. And he kept saying they will have no responsibility to the citizens. They should be responsible and accountable. And whether there was this real reason or there was a reason to oppose, I'm just saying this is where we were at that time. At this time, we would all say, thank you, Lord, for the Beaufort Jackson Water Sewer.
Yeah, if I had the fire station discussion a little bit, we had, Bobby Weber asked me some months ago about the history of the fire station, and we did some research. There are no sales records of the land that has Alcoa's name on it. But we know that Bill Cochran was instrumental, and Alcoa was instrumental in this, because we do have over here the plaque that was given to Bill Cochran by the fire district, thanking him for the contribution. And we have a interview with Emmett Decker that was done. He was our first long-time security guy. There was a guy before him that lasted for 2 days, but so he was a long-time security guy. And when he was interviewed, he talks about the fact that the rule was 5 miles. You had to be living within 5 miles of a fire station to get a break, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So he sent Emmett out to survey all the roads and find out what the furthest point was from a piece of land that was like available. You know, had a chance of, wasn't near his property, let's say that. And he went out and measured to the, one Dataw, big Dataw point there and stuff. We found out that was 5 miles away was the land indeed, where he ended up donating to the county so they could build a fire station. Don't exactly know what year or anything else, but it's certainly a true story that he was instrumental, as evidenced by the fact that
Any other?
I just want to add, very short thing. As far as insurance rates go in your fire departments, the size of your truck, the capability for pumping so many gallons a minute or whatever, all of this figures into that. So being able to buy bigger, nicer equipment also was an asset for getting your insurance rates down. Yes. I have asked the commission to read this one paragraph that's Sonny Bishop wrote in here. Sonny Bishop, by the way, is a jack of all trades. He could do everything. He refinished my dining room table twice last time stage drive for St. Helens Church was up. He had numerous businesses. But the thing that I really like that would tell you the difference between then and that, then being when this was the quiet area island without anything going on. One of the things he said was, and I'm quoting, have you ever been in a place where you could actually feel the quiet? Dataw at times was that quiet, with no animal bird sounds and no breeze to rustle the trees. Having the island to one's self was enjoyable, but it was also a pleasant feeling to leave and be back around friends and family. My feeling was friends and family is the community that you, the residents, have made here, and we're grateful to you for joining us.
I want to thank Larry and Edie very much for their time and their stories about Dataw and how it started. And interestingly enough, I grew up in a town in New Jersey right next door to Montclair and know all about the Galbraiths and their book and their families. So it was a very small community. But anyway, we're going to take a break, so please feel free to go get something to drink, and we'll start again at 3 o'clock.